And welcome everybody. Welcome back for our set of afternoon sessions here. Like Gabe said, my name is Katie Stavely. I'm the head of marketing here at Mabel. I've been with the company a little under a year now. I'm coming up on my 1-year anniversary in early December. I can't believe how fast it's gone. My background is in marketing, particularly tech marketing, mostly software for the last 20 years or so, working for companies like Mercury Interactive and then on to HP after that. Worked with a couple of open source companies as well, Aqua and Modic, that might be familiar to you. And Izzy's going to tell you a little bit about himself now.
Thanks, Katie. Thanks, Gabe. Everyone, nice to meet you. My name is Izzy Azeri, one of the co-founders of Mabel. I've worked at lots of different tech companies that you'd recognize, like VMware, EMC, Google. This is my second go around as a founder. First company was acquired by Google back in 2014. And my focus at Mabel is really spending time with our customers. And I'm excited for this session because one of the things I like to do is help them build their case for how they should approach purchasing a product like ours or any really testing or quality product. So very excited for this session.
Great, thanks, Izzy. So what I'm going to do, just tell you a little bit of what our plan is for today. So the goal of today's session is really to provide you with a handful of tips and kind of a starting point that will help you build your business case for our test automation. So you can see here, we're going to cover kind of 3 key areas. We're going to give you some details on how to assess your readiness for test automation and some of the things you might look for or measure when you're thinking about ROI of that investment. Also going to talk about some tools to help build your case. So what are the things that you can be doing internally and externally and pull together the materials that you're going to need to make that transition. And lastly, we're going to touch on some things that are going to help you manage change within your organization. Any kind of investment like this is going to require a level of change management, whether that's people, process, all of the above. So we're going to give you a few tips to help with that as well. And like Gabe said, at any time, go ahead and submit your questions through the Q&A tab, and we can take those at the end and get some answers for you.
So maybe to start off, I think one of the ways that is a good method in terms of how to build a business case first is to start with the data, right? Try to understand what's happening in your environment, and this is more at a macro level. But this is a report that came out about 2 years ago that talks about the cost of poor quality software. And I was shocked personally when I was reading this that in the US in 2018, the cost of poor quality software was $3 trillion, which is such a significant sum of money that I couldn't even believe it. But more importantly, as it relates to finding and fixing defects, that's about 17% of that overall number, about $500 million. So you can imagine it costs a lot of money when these defects actually are found later in the development process. And one of the recommendations from this report is saying that the more quality exercise, the more quality efforts you can do earlier in the process, the cost of quality defects will go down pretty significantly. So even if you can, shave that number in half, I think that's going to save people a lot of money when it comes to building high quality software. So this is one of the, I think, the macro elements that, if you're building a business case for your manager, you can use this type of data to help them understand the ROI of investing in quality software. If you go to the next slide, Katie, we also took another approach to this, which is every year Mabel does a survey to thousands of engineers, QA automation engineers, manual testers, and really just engineering leaders around their state of quality within their organizations. And one of the questions we asked them is, how do their customers feel about their product? And here on the left, you can see the different responses that we've gotten from our user group. Everything from terrible, or our customers only buy it because there's nowhere else to go, all the way to amazing and delighted, and they don't really have any open issues. That's really interesting, but one of the other things that we did using this data is also correlated what these same people said about their level of test coverage. And not surprisingly, companies with no test coverage, 25% of companies that have terrible customer experience have almost no test coverage, which is baffling to me how they can just put out software like that. But as you scale down, you can see all the way at the bottom, amazing companies have 90% test coverage, or even 40% have very significant test coverage. So I think this goes to show that when customers buy your product and they're repeat customers, you get high NPS and you're able to compete more effectively in the market. High quality software has a direct correlation to customers really buying your product. So this is another, I think, more relevant data point at a micro level that could also be used for demonstrating the need for quality when it comes to software today and how you build that case. So Katie, I'll hand it back over to you. Actually, I think I'm going to go for one more slide if you want to go to the next slide. As we were building, this kind of presentation, what we did was we talked to quality leaders at different organizations. And one of the ones we talked to at a very popular software application you'd recognize said she went into an organization where it was all manual testing. And she asked the questions like, why are we doing manual testing in this day and age? And the feedback was test automation is just too hard, right? The frameworks are too difficult to stand up. It's too difficult to find experienced people to maintain these frameworks. And there's just too many dependencies that we're just going to do everything manually. So that we've gone from this phase of like testing just being elusive or almost impossible to now it's required, right? I think even agile teams are moving at a pace, so quickly that manual testing isn't keeping up. In addition to that, development teams are shipping software in these new automated pipelines, and testing is now a requirement, automated testing being a requirement in order to ship at that speed. And the other thing that we've seen is technology is now an enabler for true automation, effective automation. So the reality is automation is here, and now we have to figure out how do we build the case for that within our organizations to adopt new technology. So Katie?
Great. So thanks, Izzy. And now that we've established that test automation is no longer a nice to have, that it's really a need to have within your organization, particularly if you're moving into automated pipelines or trying to speed up, the time it takes for you to deploy, or how often you're deploying updates to your product. It's always easier to say that it's need to have, but the reality is it takes some work to implement a solution like this, and frankly any solution where you're impacting multiple teams cross-functionally within your organization. So as you're thinking about making that investment and getting that over that initial hurdle of moving to test automation, it's good to keep in mind and good to reiterate with your team members and with your organization and even your management team that there's real value in making this transition. So when you're implementing modern tools, of course, like Mabel, there's a couple of things that you can really count on that will help deliver value to your organization. But it will, fundamentally allow your team to do a couple of things. So it'll help your team to speed up, test creation and test maintenance. So you're no longer going to have to wait long periods of time to create those tests. You'll be able to minimize the amount of time you're taking to maintain those tests. You'll improve reliability with things like machine intelligence. And even you'll be able to import your existing Selenium scripts, for example, into Mabel. So that you can leverage some of the work that you've already done and not worry about losing the time or the investment that you've put there. The second area is really in cost savings. So thinking about how you're going to save money over doing things like scripted tests or using manual testers. So the biggest overhead is probably within people hours. So you're going to save people hours, whether you're using manual testers or whether your own team is taking the time to build and maintain those tests. The other area that you may see the improvements or cost savings would be with infrastructure costs. So if you're trying to scale your tests and increase test coverage and implement more of these things, and you're using public cloud or you're even using your own data center, there's a cost associated with maintaining those systems and systems and software that will support those things. So thinking about how you're going to reduce the cost of that infrastructure along the way as well. And the last area is with test coverage. So if you caught the session earlier with Sensomatic, Adib actually talked about this a little bit of how his team increased test coverage with the help of automation. I think the numbers he quoted is they went from 50% to 96%, and that's the one of the key areas of measurement for his organization. So being able to apply quick test creation and lowering maintenance allows you to better allocate your hours to things like increasing that test coverage. Also thinking about how you're going to embed automated tests earlier in your phases of dev, and reusing those same tests across a pipeline enables you to take advantage of more scalable testing. And so for reference, you can see what some of our customers have achieved in some of these areas. So Arch, for example, they saw 98% faster test creation. ITS saw 80% cost savings over Selenium. And Maestro QA was able to deploy 50% more or more often with the help of automation. So again, there's real benefit in these things, and undoubtedly you'd be able to tie actual dollars to each of these areas. So let's talk a little bit about, we've talked a little bit about all the positive benefits of test automation. And now, let's take some time to talk about how do you know when it's the right time for you and your organization. In other words, how do you know, you're ready for a change? More often than not, we've heard from our customers, they kind of focus on three key areas. And the first is meeting test coverage goals. So if, do you have test coverage goals at your organization? What does that mean? And how does that impact quality for your team and for your product? And then ultimately how that impacts the customer or user experience. If maintaining and creating tests is really too hard or too slow for your organization, so much that it's inhibiting your ability to, create, tests beyond just those happy paths, it might be time for a change. So really thinking about how do you get out of, doing that repetitive task of, creating the same tests over and over again, or slightly modified tests, or maintaining those existing tests. The way that you gain more test coverage is by, enabling your team to do more in less time, really. Along the same lines, are you faced with growing bottlenecks because not enough team members can create tests? So finding a solution that's going to help you enable more people, particularly non-technical people, to be able to create tests. Certainly, there's going to always be a role for your QA professionals and QA engineers, where they're going to be guiding those team members on the types of tests, where they should be creating those tests, and all of those things. But really, enabling more people on your team to be able to help support that effort so that you can gain that test coverage. And the last area that we've heard related to test coverage is that oftentimes our customers have made the change because they don't actually have access to enough skilled team members, both on the QA side, but then also enough access to manual testers. So really it became the challenge of getting the scale that they needed, but they really needed more help and they didn't have access to it. So finding and using tools like Mabel to help enable that. So the second area that you want to consider when you're evaluating whether or not it's the right time for you is thinking about your defect resolution goals. So are you resolving bugs and other issues within your product fast enough, and are you bringing the total number and aggregate down to the point where it's materially impacting your customer experience in a positive way? So thinking about what does the handoff look like between your dev team and your QA team? Is that impacting your defect resolution? Is it taking too much time for you to share that information between the two groups? And are there ways that you can, improve that? As part of that, one of the things that, as talking to some of our customers and folks that we know in the industry, one of the key and most critical factors is trust between those organizations. So how can you help facilitate and improve trust between your QA team, your dev team, and even across those teams, so that you can improve, whether it's defect resolution or other aspects of improving overall quality of your product. Enabling those better handoffs means that whatever you're selecting or whatever solution you're putting into place really needs to fit into your tech stack as it is today. So it should be easy for your team members to really adopt the solution and not have to go out of their way to execute the same tasks if it's taking them longer or it's more complicated. Aside from the initial learning curve, certainly there's going to be a learning curve up front, but if in the long run it's taking a really long time for them to do what could be done by simple coding or other things, maybe just thinking that through and thinking about where those advantages might be. And then lastly, I talked a little bit about test coverage already, but a lack of test coverage could really be affecting your ability to meet those defect resolution goals. So while these are, we have this whole section on test coverage, it actually affects your, the second area as well. If you're not gaining, not able to apply more tests in an effective way. And lastly, the third area is with code deployment getting faster. And so we talked a little bit about this already, but as your team is making a transition into automated pipelines or automating aspects of your pipeline, even going so far as to taking a CI or CI/CD approach, as those pipelines get faster and as things move quickly through the development process, testing has to move quickly too. Otherwise, you're going to be faced with enormous bottlenecks. So if you're already starting to see that in your organization, or your team's looking to make that transition, in the next 6 months or 12 months or even down the road, it's really an opportune time for you to really think about how you're doing testing, how you're approaching it, how your team approaches it, both from a process perspective, but also, how and what tools you're implementing to help with that. And really the last kind of area that I think is worth touching on when it comes to code deployment is, what's the cost of not automating? So if your entire pipeline is automated from a development standpoint, but you're not automating testing yet, like how, where are the hidden costs that lie in there, whether that's people costs, whether that's, hard costs like, releases slipping, increased manual testers, which, has a cost to the organization, the opportunity costs of a bug in production, as well as soft costs, right? Team efficiency and pride of workmanship around the product that you're bringing to market. And so let's talk a little bit about testing as a team sport and enabling tightly integrated teams. The quality standards that your team or your customers demand is dependent on your organization's ability to flourish as a quality as a culture across your team. While automation is not going to solve anything, it's like any other tool without proper implementation and effective processes to go with it. It's just going to be a tool. So making sure that you're not only establishing or implementing that automation, but also thinking about what are all the other pieces that go into that. And really it's about thinking about the team in addition to that. So embedding QA with a shared responsibility and allowing your team to become more efficient when all testing isn't pushed through, one or a couple of people. I'd heard this actually on the roundtable I was on just before this, that when it becomes the focal point of one person, it becomes really difficult to get buy-in, and it becomes difficult for it to really get adopted and, utilized in an effective way or an optimized way. So really thinking about embedded QA across the organization and really, multiple people playing the role of improving quality. Thinking about how you can easily share feedback and results between the team, right? If you're, again, I talked a little bit about trust a few minutes ago. So making sure that, as you're identifying those issues, that those issues can be relayed in an effective way where it's not, constantly having to do rework, but really having the information at their fingertips to be able to resolve those issues. Empowering your team members to play the best position, right? Removing the repetitive tasks of, creating or maintaining tests from your QA team so they can really focus on things that are higher value, like coaching other team members, doing more exploratory testing, things like that. If you caught Chelsea's session earlier today, which I thought was a terrific, perspective on the story and on how we think about these things, the one thing that stood out to me is she talked about how, she got her team away from just thinking about testing to thinking about quality as a whole. So testing is just a component of that, but really about thinking through how you're going to deliver that quality to your customers, and really thinking about how you're going to make it easier for everybody on your team to contribute. It's not just about the QA folks that need to contribute; it's everyone on your team. The other side of the coin here is employee satisfaction. We had talked to, someone in our industry a few weeks ago, and she made a really good point about how, folks don't want to deliver, poor quality, products to their customers. There's a pride of workmanship. There's a, pride of ownership in delivering, good things to their customers. And so thinking about those, what I call soft costs, when you're thinking about, implementing a solution like this, is enabling, team members to feel like they're contributing in a positive way, in a meaningful way, and improving that customer experience. So that's not only going to make the individuals feel better about what they're doing, it's going to help breed collaboration among your team, and really, everyone benefits when employees are happy, customers are happy. So really thinking about what can you do to help facilitate that and build that culture of quality, whether it's, automating a tool or improving these processes, or just thinking a little bit differently maybe about how how you talk about quality within your organization.
Katie, I just want to touch on one point that might not be obvious to everyone on that slide, which is, I know everyone's focused on, accelerating the pace of testing and probably saving time in terms of how long it takes to test. But one of our customers actually did a head-to-head evaluation of their existing open source framework that they were using, which is running on cloud infrastructure, to Mabel. And they not only focused on the measurement of, speed of testing and saving time, but they also, after the evaluation, they surveyed their team and said, how do you feel after now using both of these products? And there was 100% improvement in terms of how the team felt from what they were using previously to after they did the evaluation with Mabel. So, obviously that's a soft measurement, right? But I would guess that happier employees, like Katie said, lead to building great software for happy customers. So there is a tangible benefit there at the end of the road for the team, for sure.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about the nuts and bolts. Like, how do we go about, basically the process of procuring software? The first thing is, oftentimes you may not know who the approvers are or the stakeholders are in your process, but it's really important to find those out up front, so there's no delays when it comes to your expected timeline. Oftentimes, it's not only your manager that may need to approve certain software purchases, but you might have a vice president in your team that needs to approve it. You may even have a CIO level, or maybe a central purchasing approval process that you need to go through. So really understanding those stakeholders, and not only who they are, but also if you have other people in the organization who have just bought software and gone through that process, talk to them, right? Understand what those gates were like and the approval processes were like, so you're not the first one going through them. Secondly, as Katie mentioned, it's important to really establish those requirements and success criteria. And really, I would say, have it be very tangible, meaning X amount reduction in time, or X amount acceleration, or having more than one persona on the team be able to create automated tests, right? Be very specific about what your expectations are there, so that then you can measure those when you go through your diligence process with different vendors. One thing that a lot of people forget is an implementation plan, right? Everyone focuses on, this is the problem I want to solve, and I'm going to look at these alternatives, but not a lot of people think about, hey, once I purchase something, how am I going to roll that out? And this is critical because, everyone has a day job, right? But you also want to solve these problems, which are urgent problems for you. That implementation plan could be, I'm just going to put these responsibilities in the backlog for my next sprint. It could be, I'm going to pause my team for a week or two, perhaps even over the holidays while things are kind of quiet, and I'm going to implement this, on a dedicated basis. And some larger companies even bring in system integrators or partners to help with the implementation plan as well. So having a really solid implementation plan will also give the confidence to your management that you absolutely know what you're talking about, and you know what this is going to look like from a timing perspective. And then lastly, in these times especially, security is paramount. And so you should really think about what are the security requirements or basically reviews that you may have in your organization that you need to make sure that you hit. These could be a different security team, which reviews any third-party product that you use. It could be a security questionnaire that you have to fill out, or it just could be some third-party information you need to get from a vendor to understand their security posture. So don't forget about security because it will slow you down at the end if you don't check that box. The next area is making sure that you start small. What we've seen from successful implementations are perhaps a greenfield application, or perhaps an application that only had some manual testing and not a lot of test coverage, or an application that's going through a complete change, right? Maybe a new framework or something like that. So starting small, seeing some success, and expanding from there typically works pretty well. And then lastly, what's the timing? How are you thinking about when you want to pull the trigger on something like this? And oftentimes this could be driven by internal things that are happening in your company, right? There could be a budgeting cycle where you have to get approval by a certain date for budget for next year. Or it could be there's a blackout period and you want to implement during that blackout period, so you have to procure the software before then. It could also be that you have a product that you're replacing and you need to figure out the renewal timeframe for that product, so you're hitting that timeline really quickly. So again, there's lots of different things you have to think about from a timing perspective, but just make sure you have those in your back pocket before you get going. Katie, I'll hand it back over to you.
That's great advice, Izzy. Thank you. So that's our session. So we do have a couple of minutes left, but I'm going to give you a few takeaways here, and then we can ask or answer a question, maybe two, Gabe. So the first takeaway, and I think that we talked about this quite a bit throughout the session today. Quality matters, right? So it has a material cost on, or a material impact on cost on your customer experience, and I don't think that's going away anytime soon. So I think we can all agree that this is still at the forefront of what we do every day. Automation is truly inevitable. So Izzy talked a lot about this at the beginning of the session. That it's something that we're all going to be adopting one way or another. And so thinking and getting ahead of it and, helping your team, be more effective and efficient. Excuse me. The third area here, and this is really about change management. Change is easier when it's tied to values. So thinking about how your business is going to gain values or gain advantages by making this change, and really getting everybody to understand how they're going to be impacted by that. Learn your evaluation process, right? So it's one thing to be able to go and evaluate a tool and understand how it works and how it might fit into your organization. But, depending on your size organization, there's probably some level of evaluation process beyond just, looking at the tool and how the features and functions work. And lastly, crawl, walk, run. We've heard this a couple of times throughout the day today, but you don't have to start by boiling the ocean and doing everything all at once. Thinking about how you can pick something small, whether on one of the roundtables earlier, one of our participants from NCR said that in order to get his team to start adopting and doing more, they would ask the team, their dev squads, to write one Mabel test as part of a sprint. I thought that was a great example. So really thinking about how you can, start with, a small piece and then grow from there. You don't need to think about, automating everything all at once. So with that, thanks everybody. I think we have a minute left, Gabe. So maybe one question.
Yes, thank you, Izzy and Katie. What questions does everyone have? We're going to do this democratically. The highest voted question, when evaluating solutions, how do you measure the success of a trial or proof of concept?
Yeah, so it really depends on what's important to your organization. What we've seen in terms of evaluating a trial is typically there's some problem you're looking to solve. Sometimes that could be, I do manual testing for emails and PDFs, and I want to be able to automate that. Or another one could be, hey, only the QA automation engineers are able to automate today, and I want my manual testers or non-technical people to do that as well. Or it's about saving time or saving resources or accelerating testing. So really, those are some areas that we've seen of measurements around a POC or a trial.